building a better Bay Area for a safe and secure future. This is ABC 7 News.
Hi there, everyone. I'm Kristen Z. Welcome to our daily program called Getting Answers. We're asking experts your question every day at 3 o'clock to get answers for you in real time. Today, we'll talk with this California man who has documented his entire recent experience flying on American Airlines, where they didn't enforce their own mask policy. He also hashtagged it Flying While Black. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about the ongoing debate about requirements versus encouragement to wear masks on airplanes. But first, President Trump issued an executive order today on police reform. There's a bill about reform going through Congress as well. And of course, we're seeing a lot of proposals and changes locally. Joining me now to talk about all of this is a former member of the San Francisco Police Commission and Fire Commission as well, and current criminal defense attorney Joe Alioto Veronese. Joe, thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome. I'm currently a civil rights attorney in San Francisco.
All right. Thank you so much. I want to share with our viewers before we dive into our conversation. Here are some of the main takeaways from the executive order today from the president. Mr. Trump said chokeholds will be banned unless the officer's life is in danger. But senior administration officials say the order would instead promote certification bodies that train officers in de-escalation techniques and use of force standards that prohibit chokeholds. The order calls for a creation of the national database on officers with a history of misconduct. It encourages co-responders like social workers for nonviolent calls. Police departments get a financial incentive to adopt best practices. Now, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said this falls sadly and seriously short. So on the surface, to outsiders, there are some similarities between what we're seeing with the Democrats' bill, the Justice in Policing Act, and President Trump's executive order, but only a little bit. Talk about where the similarities are and where they end and what the key differences are.
Well, let me start by saying it's not President Trump's job to write the laws. That's the job of the legislature. So I'm hopeful that that the legislature will come up with a more comprehensive policy. This executive order is directing the Department of Justice and directing funds in certain directions, but really the job falls on the legislature to come up with what those national standards are going to be. All of those things that the president talks about, we've been doing in San Francisco for many years. When I was on the police commission, we started the early warning system, and that documents anytime a police officer gets into some sort of disciplinary action, and it tracks that police officer. So we've been doing that since 2007, approximately 2007. On the issue of chokeholds, chokeholds have always been illegal in San Francisco. Really, what's going to happen is it's nice to have a national standard, but really, where the rubber meets the road is going to be at that local level, right? It's going to be up to the police departments at the local level, the police commissions, if they exist, the mayor's office, to come down with policy that is really going to affect real reform. And it's going to take hard work and negotiation with those police unions, which is really great to see the POA and the Los Angeles Police Union coming together this week saying, hey, listen, we're going to work with you on some of this stuff. That's not the type of cooperation we saw when I was on the police commission back in 2004 to 2008, nor was it when I was on the California Criminal Justice Commission for the 7 years under the two governors that I served there. So it's really encouraging to see that we're talking about these things. It's not the president's job, so whatever the president's doing is great, but really it's up to the legislature to do some national standards, and then the real hard work happens at the local level. So let's make sure that those chokehold or bar arm holds, by the way, a chokehold is different from a bar arm hold. You have the carotid holds, which cuts off the blood flow. The chokehold is what they're talking about, which cuts off the airflow. Either one is bad news, in my opinion, and should be outlawed. But we've never used chokeholds in San Francisco, and it's always been prohibited. So the real hard work's at the local level. It's time to get to work on that and to continue on some of the policies, the great policies that we have here in San Francisco. And that includes the new hiring of new departments, training new people in new ways, because some of the old blood that's in the departments, they bring some of the old ways to the table. And I think that's really what this reform is really about, is putting those putting those to bed.
All right, I think the chokehold is causing a little confusion, right?
Right.
Lawrence Ching has a question on Facebook, wants to know if the officer is able to use the chokehold, how can that officer's life be considered in danger as the officer would be initiating the action?
You know, it could be totally subjective or objective rather, on what is happening at the time. You could have somebody reaching for a police officer's gun, their hands on the gun, trying to pull it out of the holster while the police officer is behind them. In that circumstance, I imagine under the president's policy, that would qualify as a police officer's life being in danger. Mm-hmm. So that's just one example of that.
All right, you talked about the real work being done at the local level, and that is absolutely true. Here in San Francisco Mayor London Breed's plan is that San Francisco police will no longer be called to settle disputes between neighbors or to handle homeless people or really any non-criminal cases. Do you think that's a good idea and a good start?
You know what? It's not really realistic. I was a police officer myself. These are calls that can escalate very quickly. So if you're asking for a person that is not trained in self-defense or in protecting others, you're putting them in a very dangerous position, in my opinion, if you're going to have civilians go into those types of scenes. They go from 0 to 60 in a second. And just to use an example, a domestic incident where you've got two people who live together, cohabitate together, and they're in some sort of verbal confrontation, right? There's nothing violent going on there at that time, but those go from verbal discussions to fights, to physical fights, and literally in a matter of seconds. So it's not realistic to say we're going to send some nonprofit guy in there with no real training and no weapons and no self-defense training. So I think that it's going to set some really dangerous precedents, and it's just a matter of time before somebody really gets hurt.
I want to also get your take on this. The Democrats' bill, we were talking about it earlier, the Justice in Policing Act. After the Supreme Court refused to take this issue up, this bill does say, it goes a little further. It includes an end to qualified immunity, which of course in many cases shields police officers, as you know, from lawsuits related to their actions. What do you think about that?
I think that is going to set some very dangerous precedents. You're going to have police officers that are going to be reluctant to go to calls, that are going to be reluctant to put their lives on the line, which is what we asked them to do. And that's really what the departments or the cities are there for. It's to protect a police officer against that type of liability. You're going to see police officers not take that job, and this is going to be more of a socialized job, which, as I mentioned before, is a very dangerous precedent.
I mean, I think a lot of people, when you talk about sending trained social workers, if you will, to certain situations, people might say, yes, that could be a good idea, avoid the potentially deadly confrontations. But what are the limits, in your opinion, to that?
There are no limits. It's a terrible idea to send somebody that has no training in physical de-escalation or self-protection or protection of others into a scene like that. It's actually very dangerous. And these are nonprofits that they're thinking about hiring, like the St. Anthony's Foundation. These are people that are formerly incarcerated. Is it really a good idea to do that? I mean, we've actually seen in the last two instances where African-American people have been killed before George Floyd. Those were vigilantes, people that were regular citizens that were taking the law into their own hands. That's what you're basically asking for this civilian population of nonprofit workers who are formerly incarcerated to do. Are those the people that you want to come to protect your life if there is a quote unquote nonviolent incident happening? You can't believe that that's going to stay nonviolent. You always have to prepare for the worst, because typically we have a lot of bad people in the world, and it can go from 0 to 60 in a matter of seconds. So we need to be prepared for that and have people that have been trained for that.
All right. So based on what you're saying, I'm going to guess, but I'm going to let you state what your position is on defunding police, which is, of course, what everybody's talking about. And we should also define defunding police, right? Because I think when most people use the term, they don't realize a lot of politicians actually mean just diverting some of the funds and redirecting them towards social services, education, and things like that. Define that way. What's your opinion?
Well, it is. It means taking money away that you would have otherwise gotten. Our department in San Francisco has been below that 1994 standard of full-time police officers ever since 1994. We've been trying to catch up, but we've hired hundreds and hundreds of police officers trying to get up to that 1,709, I think it's 1,971 police officers, but we've fallen short every year because of attrition. It's not a bad thing because we're getting some of the older police officers out that come with the older ways. We have a better department today. That being said, defunding is a terrible idea because we're already understaffed. What we should be doing is reimagining a police department. We have never seen a police department successfully be fully disbanded. By way of example, there was a department back east that tried it, but really what they did was they fired everybody and then hired them right back. They put a paint job on it. So that model has not worked. What we need to do is reimagine what a police department looks like. And for me, that means community policing. We need people that live in our community. We need to change the law so that we can force police officers who work here to actually live here, because we're less likely to have the person down the street who you know and you see every day. That's not the guy that's going to put his knee on your neck, right? This isn't the guy that you see every day is not the guy that is going to actually do this. Those personal relationships are really important, and that's what we should be pushing. Community policing, a real community policing model is what we should have.
All right, Attorney Joe Aliero Veronese, former member of the San Francisco Police Commission. Thank you so much for having this conversation with us today.
Thank you. Take care.
You too. We're going to take a short break on the air, and when we come back, we're going to shift topics to masks while flying. One passenger from California has spent the past 2 weeks voicing his concern about enforcement. We'll talk with him next. We're going to take a short break on the air, but of course the conversation continues on our live streams right now. All right, thank you so very much. Our awesome engineer, Dave, was kind enough to bring me some water. I drink a lot of water because there's a lot of talking involved in this show. Thank you for joining me. I did take a couple of days off, lots of family stuff, kids, end of the school year stuff. So it's good to be back. And of course, a lot has happened in the past few days. And one of those big items is coming up next. We're going to discuss the airlines group that kind of came together and made an announcement today about masks going forward while flying. Hey, Tony, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you today?
Doing just great. I'm drinking water now, so I feel better. I have a hard time talking without water.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I know the feeling.
Are you in Burbank right now?
I'm actually in Dallas. I'm still in Texas, Texas right now.
Oh, so after your flight, you never went back? You never came back to California? Okay.
Exactly. They had a quarantine period, so I've just thought I'd stay here and spend some family time. So.
I gotcha. All right. You're already on the air. Well, not live on TV, but on Facebook. We're streaming right now. So, folks, this is Tony Scott. Thank you so much for joining us. I found Tony on Twitter, the meeting place of so many people and friendships where it all starts these days. So we welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much.
All right. Tony has a very interesting story to tell with regard to flying. And so today, when we heard about the announcement that the airlines are going a little further and trying to ensure passengers keep their masks on in flight, we reached out to Tony and wanted him to share his story. So that's coming up. I'm not going to spoil it for you right now. We're coming back on air in about 25 seconds. All right, welcome back. Today, an industry group representing major U.S. airlines announced that they will begin stricter enforcement of mask wearing on airlines. This as summer travel starts to pick up and more Americans are taking to the skies again. But a Burbank-based rider who took a flight on American Airlines a couple of weeks ago has concerns about enforcement. Tony Scott joins us today from Texas to talk about his experience. Hi, Tony.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so right now you're in Texas, right? Not in California?
That's correct.
All right. So you worry about how committed the airlines may be with the mask wearing and enforcement because of your own experience. Tell us about the flight that you were on May 25th, right?
Yes. Yeah, so May 25th, I took a flight from Los Angeles to Dallas. Decided I'd spend some time here in Texas to quarantine with my son, and was a little reluctant to fly, but we hadn't seen each other for about 6 months. And so I thought maybe if I get a first class ticket, that'll give me more space. And every piece of literature, website, app from American Airlines said that masks are required of all passengers, that's their new rules. So I was like, okay, that's going to be great. So on this flight, like I said, it was a wide body plane, flew first class. I noticed that the young lady sitting next to me wasn't wearing a mask. She was having a snack, no big deal because, you're allowed to take off your mask to eat. But after that, she was just kind of just chilling out. So I just kind of leaned over and said, hey, do you need a mask? I got some extras because I just happened to carry masks. And she said no, that she had one. And for the rest of the flight, the mask never went on. So I summoned a flight attendant to make him aware that she wasn't wearing a mask. And he told me that masks were optional. So I took out my phone and just showed him on the app that the app said that even according to your CEO, he has a video here, says that all the passengers are required to wear a mask in flight. He's not wearing a mask. So he left and went to speak to, I guess, one of the senior flight attendants, and came back maybe 30, 45 minutes later and said that the young lady who was a teenager, about 15, 16, something like that, didn't have to wear a mask because she was a child. And I said, well, she's a teen and, she's just as risky as any adult. And so he was being condescending and kind of leaned down to her and said, sweetie, do you want to wear a mask? And she said no. And he's like, sorry, nothing I can do about it. Then he walked off. And that was sort of my experience. So I asked for another flight attendant to see if they could resolve this somehow. And maybe they could move me to another seat or something. They could not accommodate me. They didn't really seem interested in accommodating me.
Okay. Now, was this girl's parents, were they on board, and did they get involved somehow?
That was the shocking part because, yes, she was flying with her parents. Her mother was sitting right behind her, and her father was sitting behind me. And it could have been just simply, switching out our seats. And coincidentally, both parents were wearing masks.
Oh, okay. So they chose to wear masks, yet they didn't want to tell her to. You know what? You did hashtag this experience, Flying While Black. Why is that?
I don't think the flight attendants were being, racist per se or overtly racist, but just in light of everything going on with, the George Floyd protest or so, I just wonder that if I were a Caucasian male and this child was a little black girl who refused to put on a mask, would I have gotten the same response or would I have been taken more seriously? And sometimes I wonder if I would have been taken more seriously because I just felt like it was discounted. So that was more an effort to get their attention. But that's sort of how I felt in the moment that, oh, well, he doesn't have a mask, no big deal. And I even disclosed that I have health issues. Pretty much I have some pulmonary issues and asthma that put me at a higher risk category, but they did not seem to be too concerned about that.
Wasn't there something that happened while you were boarding that flight that you took also as a microaggression and made you feel more like this was a case of flying while black?
This is true because, and that's the whole point about flying while black, because as I told you, I was flying first class. And when I got on the plane, first class was to the left and coach was to the right. So I went to the left and the flight attendant stuck out her arm to block me. It's like, I'm flying first class. She's like, well, I need to see your ticket. What seat are you? And, I showed her my seat and then it was fine. But it's just little things like that. They aren't necessarily meant to be racist, but when you're in black skin, it can sort of come across that way because the assumption was I didn't either belong in first class or I couldn't afford first class. So it's just little instances like that.
I'm so sorry. It's like the 1,000 little cuts, right? It does hurt and it adds up. But I want to ask you, you are an elite status flyer. So you see flight attendants' interactions with passengers a lot. Do you think they're just hesitant to get into a conflict? And if that is the case, do you think there needs to be a government mandate to give them a little more teeth?
Yeah, I think they probably are hesitant to get into to a conflict. And I think part of that is the fact that I learned in the process that
Tony, you know what I'm going to do? Let's go ahead and take this answer over to our live stream platforms, because we do have to take a short break on the air. Be right back.
That's good.
All right, Tony, thank you. Sorry about that, but I do want to hear what your thoughts are, because they never want to get into a confrontation up in the air. They feel in danger, right? They have to think about everyone's safety. So, yeah, where does their role end and where does the federal government's role begin, you think?
Exactly. And that's where I'm going to talk about how the FAA does not mandate that. So,
do you think that would help a lot if there was, you know, some, for example, criminal action for not wearing the mask?
Yeah, because not wearing a seatbelt is technically a criminal action.
This is true. So I want to ask you also, so what has American done since? Obviously, you put your experience on social, you got a lot of reaction. So did the airline reach out to you? Did they make amends somehow?
Yeah, they've made a few phone calls, and I spoke with someone, and they did a 5-day investigation, and they came back after the 5 days, and they concluded that their flight attendants handled the situation appropriately. And that,
So do you get a refund? Do you get something?
No refund. They called back afterwards because I told them I just felt that I just felt very insulted, you know, that I had a bad experience, and they, you know, didn't want to use that. But they came back and offered 10,000 flight miles. But I didn't accept. I told them I would consult with an attorney first.
I see. All right. Well, I hope there was no negative health consequence on you. I think you took the precaution of quarantining yourself after the flight, right?
Correct.
All right. And I just, you know, hope that, you know, it's, you don't want everything to be political. There's some things that are public health related, and hopefully that message does come through loud and clear. Tony, thank you for sharing your story. Best to you. Enjoy your time with your son in Texas. Take care.
Thank you so much.
And we're back. We want to dig deeper now into the announcement from the industry trade group we were talking about, representing the airlines, that if passengers don't wear masks on flights in the future, they could have privileges revoked, including possibly losing their privilege to fly with that airline. So I talked with the president of UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital, Dr. Michael Anderson, and asked him what he thought about it.
Yeah, I think it's really good progress. A couple of weeks ago, I was on a flight. I had delayed a business trip, as a lot of American travelers had done, but I really had to get on this trip. And a passenger came on, went right past me without a face mask on. And I did something I don't typically do. I started snapping pictures of people coming onto the plane, walking past me without a mask on, and put it on Twitter. It got a lot of attention. It basically boils down to this. Us wearing masks right now is protecting each other. Us wearing masks and trying to keep as socially distant as possible is one way to prevent the spread of this. We don't have a vaccine yet. We're working on therapies. So these things called NPIs, non-pharmaceutical interventions, they haven't gone away, right? This pandemic is still here. So when I was on the tight, very, cramped space of an aircraft, I'm wiping everything down. I'm very concerned. But I thought it was really terrible that nobody was enforcing a regulation. So to your question, I think this is a good step by the airlines to take it more seriously.
I was just going to say, I mean, what is the federal government's role in it, right? Because the airlines, that is about as they can go, as far as they can go, saying you can't fly with us anymore. We don't want your business. But really, don't you need kind of like the law behind you? Don't you want either the FAA or the TSA to say, look, this is a security threat in a way, a public health security threat, so we're going to take action? Or is that not an area they can wade into?
I think they can, and once again, as a pediatrician, I'm a little outside my expertise. But if you think about it, when you listen to the safety briefing, there's actually something that says federal law requires you to comply with lighted signs and crew member instructions. Now, I think that's rarely enforced, and I understood, my Twitter activity got really intense about people saying, well, people have been accosted in Costco because the manager said put a mask on, so we don't want to put our flight attendants at risk. I get that. That to me then says the federal government or law enforcement or somebody has to take this seriously. Another friend of mine said, if you lit up a cigarette on that aircraft, which of course I wouldn't do, the weight of the law would come down upon you. Well, This is a public health emergency or public health crisis, just like that.
Well, what more do you think they could also mandate? For example, I'm thinking about the middle seat, right? If they tell the airlines you can't sell the middle seat, does that then mean they would have to subsidize the loss of that revenue?
Yeah, it gets really complicated, doesn't it? When I flew United, and United's one of the carriers in that organization you just mentioned, and they put out a separate press announcement yesterday saying we're taking this seriously and we enforce it. When I've flown United since this all came down, indeed the middle seat is vacated. But you bring up a great point. Is that then cutting a third of their revenue for a flight? So are the airlines then going to go back and say to the federal government, okay, we're doing our part, but why don't you start helping us? I mean, it's really complicated, but once again, this is saving lives. I tweeted on Saturday. I usually walk along the Embarcadero on Saturday, right by your studio, and it was probably 50% of people that had masks on, and that's a whole bit different kettle. We've got to take this seriously because this is protecting each other while we work on a vaccine. So I think the Fed more and more have to get involved.
Well, I mean, and I will say on the Embarcadero, right, it's like if it's packed, if you're getting really close to people, you got to have that mask. If you really, truly can keep yourself 10 feet away or more, that's an argument that you can make for maybe choosing not to wear it in that moment. But on the plane, you really don't have that option, which leads to my question. Does it really make a difference if you don't have the middle seat? So let's say you're 2 feet away from the next person by the window as opposed to 1 foot away. Does that really make much of a difference?
I think it does because you are a little bit more distant, and this is Mike's opinion, not necessarily scientific fact, but you're also not touching the person next to you, right? You're not accidentally brushing up against their elbow or touching their bag. So just like they're trying to board in different ways and get you apart, I do think, it's not 6 feet unless you're flying some, luxury aircraft that only has 2 seats. But I do think this notion of social distancing, of course, is first 6 to 10 feet, but it's also trying to avoid contact. So I think the middle seat's pretty common sense, too.
All right, Dr. Anderson also stressed the notion that we are testing more is why we're seeing more cases is not true. He says we're seeing more cases in the ICU and more hospital patients as well. And wearing a mask when you get near anybody is your best bet to protect everyone. We're going to take a short break on air, but the conversation continues on our live streams, including Facebook Live right now. All right, folks, thanks for watching today and engaging in our conversation. I just want to check out some of the things that you're saying, commenting on after we heard a couple of, I'm sorry, my producer's talking to me. Go ahead. Oh, yes. My producer was also noting what I'm noting, which is that you guys really have different opinions about Tony Scott, the passenger on American who was in first class, and the 15, 17-year-old girl next to him did not want to wear a mask, and the flight attendant kind of went, after, saying, sweetie, do you want to wear a mask? And she said no. And this was in spite of the fact that he pulled up American's app, which says, you have to wear a mask while on board. So enforcement has been spotty, as we kind of know from looking at all the photos posted on social, but the airlines are promising to turn a new leaf today by now saying that you could lose flying privileges with the airlines if you do not comply. So what are you folks saying about it? Some of you say she's just a teenager. Others feel like her parents should have gotten involved and told her to wear the mask. By the way, the parents sitting behind them, they were wearing masks. And then there's some who feel like race doesn't have anything to do with it. But other people feel that, race was likely a component of that. And certainly what he said earlier about boarding and the flight attendant putting her hand out to say, you're not coming to the first class section until he showed his boarding pass. That is something that probably adds to his perception and colors the perception of that interaction, which came later over the mask. All right, so some of you say, yes, it's up to the federal government. If they could just pass a mandate, it would make it easier for the airlines to enforce that as well, which I think a lot of people agree with. Thank you for keeping the conversations always polite on our forums. We appreciate that. All right, coming back on air. That's going to do it for now. Thank you for joining us today on this interactive show, Getting Answers. We hope you got some today. We heard the opinion of a former member of the San Francisco Police Commission and current civil rights attorney. He took a strong stance, actually, against sending people like social workers out to nonviolent calls. We also got into the topic of masks being required on airplanes. We'll be here every day at 3 on air and on live stream answering your questions. Bye-bye. All right, Facebook, thank you, everybody, for watching today. I'll see you back here same time tomorrow.